Welcome to the Core Connection. I'm Mira Rubin here with you on Enlightened World Network, and today's topic is life as process. We're so outcome driven. We're so driven to achievements, accomplishments, productivity, et cetera, and that orientation often impedes our ability to actually be present to life itself. So we're going to talk about life as process today. So it should be an interesting conversation. And before we get started, we're going to take a minute or two to get present. So let's take a deep breath in through your nose and hold it. And imagine clean, crisp oxygen flooding your lungs, flowing into your bloodstream, nourishing all your cells, all your organs, bringing vital life energy to your body and being. And as you exhale, exhale any tension, stress, negativity, fatigue. And now let's take another deep breath in through your nose and hold it. This time, imagine clean, brilliant, bright light lighting you up from the inside out, illuminating, electrifying, and energizing all your cells, your molecules, your electrons, creating a brilliant beam of light and energy from your heart out into the world. And as you exhale, exhale any remaining tension, stress, negativity, fatigue. And now let's press our palms together. Vigorously rub your hands together to feel the friction, the temperature, the pressure, the motion, the tickling and tingling when you stop. And allow all those sensations to bring you present right here, right now, into this remarkable physical form that enables us to experience life. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Good morning. Rosalind, welcome. So good to have you here with us this morning. And welcome to everybody else who's joining us. Today, we're talking about life as process. In other words, we are an ongoingly unfinished work. And we are taking on the notion and the perspective that we are as ever an unfinished process. We are so driven in our culture toward results, toward accomplishment, toward things, externals. And we tend to latch on to identities, who we believe we are. We'll grab onto a fixed notion of who we are. Like we identify with our jobs, we identify with our roles in our families or our work, we identify with our stuff. All these things, well, not all of them, I guess the relationship things, some of them remain regardless of circumstance. But so much of our identity tends to be circumstantial, based in circumstance. So the idea of being identified with our work, that's who I am, right? Or our beliefs, which change, that's who I am. And when we can adopt the perspective of life as process, then we can allow for those things that might otherwise feel static to change. We can allow for the change in life that is inevitable, and the evolution, the emergence. And it gives us permission to be able to change our minds, to be able to change our perspective, to be able to evolve. Actually, when we think about life as process, we don't need to be bound to the past in the same way. If we believe we are our actions, then typically we are defined by our past actions. And that constrains the potential of the future. When we allow ourselves to be living life as process, we can be so much more forgiving to ourselves and others, to recognize we're not necessarily the same people that we were yesterday, let alone 5 years ago, 10 years ago, etc. And the upshot of this is that when we live life as process rather than outcome, there's a greater potential for freedom, for the experience of freedom, for the expression of freedom, so that we can allow ourselves to be moving into our emergent selves. If I were to look at my past, for example, I would have to say there's no way that I got from there to here. There is no path, no linear path from there to here. And the upshot of that is that had I held to the very strong definitions that I had of who I was, had I not allowed the emergence, had I not allowed the evolution, I wouldn't be the person that I am in this moment. So I talk a lot about holding life, holding belief with open hand. And what I mean by that is not grasping, not clinging to our fixed notions. We've all heard the saying that the one constant in life is change. And that's actually quite true. We can count on things changing. And we don't know how they're going to change, but we can count on them changing. And the more grace that we are able to cultivate in the face of that change, the more graced our lives will be. The more ease we'll be able to experience as life changes, as we change, as circumstances change around us. And the greatest gift that we can give ourselves, I believe, is the gift of grace through change, because it allows us then to dance with life, to take life's lead and find our own rhythm within that dance. When we look at life as process, we can also recognize the many different factors that influence that process. We are automatically connected, more connected to a bigger picture that goes beyond our own limited perception of ourselves. Because we see ourselves as part of this process. It's not just the process of my becoming, but my becoming occurs in a much greater context, in the context of all the influences and all the dynamics of a broader experience. So when we look at life as outcome, it seems as I'm feeling into it, it feels very much that there's an isolation in that, where we might say there's an isolation and an evaluation and a judgment that's sort of final rather than an ongoing evolution. So life as outcome is measuring ourselves by our achievements, measuring our value, for example, by our achievements, whether they are material, intellectual, emotional, whatever, versus an ongoing, maybe suspension of that judgment as fixed. So we can say, okay, I didn't really like that outcome, or I didn't like the way that I behaved in that situation, or I have these dreams and aspirations of where I'm heading. The thing about life as process versus outcome is that when we view life as outcome, like I'm going to make all this money, this is just a really simple, common one. I'm going to have the family, make all the money, have the beautiful house with the picket fence and the dog and whatever. And then what happens if that's the outcome? We get there and life should be blissful. Or we have an anticipation and expectation that life is going to be blissful and fulfilling. When in fact, what I've noticed for so many people is we get to that place and what we experience is this all there is? There's got to be more. And so what we're talking about now is meaning. Meaning. And when we have that sense of meaning, it's sort of the undercurrent or the underlying tapestry that connects all the outcomes, that transcends the outcomes, so to speak. And we have this sense of a greater connection, a greater tapestry. And in that expression of purpose and meaning, that too, that allows us, I think, to connect more deeply with life as process. Because it's not like with the deeper sense of meaning and purpose, while there may be objectives along the way, typically there's no endpoint. Whatever that sense of meaning and purpose is, it's an evolutionary, emergent type experience that is generated from that sense of meaning and purpose. And when we attach our meaning and purpose to things like what's coming to mind is parenting, because kind of the objective of parenting is to at least in my mind, not being a parent, admittedly, but is to support your kids into being able to become free thinking individuals, to support your kids into being able to be creating lives that they find fulfillment in, and to be developing a certain level of independence. I know that parenting doesn't end, but there are demarcations, I would imagine, where kids ideally become more independent. And so when that happens, when the nest is empty, that can be a crisis if we've identified with the earlier phases of parenting, the active hands-on day-to-day of parenting, because of the way we've identified in that whole process. So when we can, I don't know if that is the best example or not, but what I see is that if I believed, and I think I'm saying this for me, but the reason I'm saying it is because I think it applies to all of us. If we believe that we are a fixed entity, life is over before we even start. And when we embrace life as a process, there's it gives us more space to be able to embrace change, to change our minds. Going back to what we were saying in the beginning, to be able to change our minds, to be able to grow, to be able to be in this responsive, collaborative unfolding of life, this dance that is a give and take, that is a back and forth and dip and twirl together. I think also recognizing life as process, we can recognize that it's not a linear happening, and progress, quote unquote, progress is not a linear thing, a progressive thing. It doesn't necessarily always move forward. It's one step forward, two steps forward, one step back kind of thing too, or maybe a couple steps sideways. That there's this very elaborate picture. One thing that I think is becoming clearer and clearer to humans through science and through our growing awareness of the systems that are interoperational on the planet is that there's a much greater complexity than we had imagined, that there's a much greater diversity and interrelationship and beauty, in fact, to all these aspects of life and our world that in our arrogance we assumed we knew or we understood. And what we're learning is that that things are so much richer. And what I'm thinking about now is just discovering that there are in the forest all these underground mycelial and bacterial and organic connections between and communications between all the different plants and critters that are involved in an ecosystem. We were talking yesterday about keystone species and the how the shifting of one species can change a whole ecosystem and ecology. And that is very much a part of recognizing life as process, that there's this incredibly rich tapestry of interconnected and interwoven parts of a system that are ultimately inseparable. These parts, they can't exist without each other. So, for instance, in Yellowstone, went, they had eradicated the wolves, and the whole ecosystem declined as a result. So life as process, life as systems, maybe. And these systems aren't necessarily bounded. You know, the boundaries that we recognize for the systems are arbitrary because they're all interwoven, they're all interconnected. And if we can see our lives, see ourselves as systems within systems within systems, processes within processes within processes, then we start to connect more deeply and directly to the magic of life itself, to the magic of our own unfoldment, our own evolution, our own emergence. And it's not like we're getting to an end point in that emergence. And when we think what's coming to mind is that, again, life is process. We're born, we grow into an expression, and then we decline. And a friend and I were talking, and they were talking about the composting phase of life, where life goes back to its beginnings. We call it death, and it's still part of a greater process of life, where this life cycle, birth, maturing, decline, death. I don't even know if I mean, we perceive it as decline, but it's part of this larger process that we are engaged in. And we have such a cultural fear of death, when in fact it is an essential part of a greater process. There's an acceptance and allowing, I think, that comes about with this embracing the notion of process, of life as process, that allows for greater ease, that improves the quality of our lives. In terms of emotion, again, it allows us to be more forgiving of ourselves and others, hopefully. Maybe more accepting of all the transitions, that it's all a process. And it's an ongoing process that we're part of. It takes the emphasis away from our maybe our self-importance. Obviously, we're important to ourselves, but when we can see ourselves as part of a greater process, it just relieves so much of that pressure, so much of the pressure of having to be a certain way, having to prove something. And when we are liberated from having to prove anything, it frees us to be able to be in our fuller expression, in our authentic expression. So That's the invitation today, is go go and explore this rabbit hole of what does it mean if life is process rather than outcome? And what can we provide for ourselves in terms of the allowing and the freedom of our own emergence? So that's it for today. I'm Mira Rubin. This is the Core Connection, and I go live here each weekday morning at 9 a.m. Eastern on the Enlightened World Network Facebook page and YouTube channel. And I invite you to please like, follow, and share Enlightened World Network and me. The links are in the description. And as always, it's a privilege and a pleasure to have the opportunity to be sharing in these morning musings about being human. So much gratitude.